It was 7:45 a.m. when the day started inside the Pearl Harbor Naval Command Center. The hum of printers mixed with the steady tapping of keyboards and the murmur of officers trading updates across workstations. The air smelled faintly of salt and coffee, a blend of the sea and routine discipline. Screens flickered with logistics data, while clipboards and folders shifted from one hand to another in the rhythm of controlled chaos. Near the front of the room, a group of officers gathered to introduce the new support staff assigned to operations. The atmosphere was casual, filled with light jokes and half attention. Among the cluster stood Petty Officer First Class Sarah Blake, 36 years old, holding a thin folder close to her chest. Her uniform was immaculate, pressed to regulation, and her shoes shined to mirror polish. She kept her back straight and her eyes calm, waiting quietly for instruction. A young lieutenant leaned toward his friend and muttered that she looked like just another desk clerk. The comment drew a low chuckle from the group, a brief wave of dismissive humor that passed through the room. Sarah gave a small nod and a polite smile that carried no trace of reaction. She simply took her place at the desk assigned to her and began checking the personnel files with quiet efficiency. To anyone watching, she blended in almost completely. To anyone paying closer attention, she moved differently. Chief Warrant Officer Miguel Perez, a veteran with over 2 decades of service, noticed it immediately. She scanned each corner of the room before entering, a habit of situational awareness he recognized from field operators, not office personnel. Her movements were deliberate, her focus unwavering. She greeted officers with perfect military courtesy, using correct ranks and addressing each by title. When she organized documents, her hands were steady, her sequence methodical, as if following a protocol long ingrained through repetition. Perez watched her for a moment longer before turning back to his console. There was something about her quiet presence that didn't fit the image of a simple clerk. She was too controlled, too composed, too practiced in silence. Around here, the room carried on with the routine of a normal morning. Yet somewhere beneath that calm, a deeper story waited, unseen but unmistakably there. By the end of her first week, Sarah Blake had become part of the rhythm of the Pearl Harbor Command Center. She moved quietly through the noise of printers and radio chatter, sorting rosters, approving transfer requests, and updating supply schedules. Most of the officers barely noticed her anymore. To them, she was just another clerk keeping things organized, while the real work happened elsewhere. Het is niet. Her reports precise, her tone always respectful. She was invisible in all the ways the Navy rewarded. Lieutenant Connor Hale filled every corner of the room with his voice. He joked that she belonged to the paper battalion, a unit that fought only with staplers and spreadsheets. He said she probably never saw a deck under sunlight. The others laughed, the kind of laughter that came easy in places where hierarchy made mockery safe. Sarah never raised her voice or looked offended. She just smiled slightly and kept typing, answering with quiet humor when he pushed too far. Her calmness made the teasing lose its edge. It irritated Hale more than any argument could have. Chief Warrant Officer Miguel Perez started watching her the way a mechanic studies an unfamiliar sound in an engine. He noticed how she moved when a drill alarm blared across the base. Before anyone else reacted, she turned instinctively toward the exit route, body low, scanning for the source. During long shifts, she never sat with her back to a door. Her workspace was always clean, her boots placed precisely beneath her desk. She handled tension, not like someone new to it, but like someone trained to absorb it. One afternoon, an MH-60R Seahawk passed low over the base. The noise rattled windows and sent papers fluttering. Everyone looked up for a moment, laughing about the pilot's low pass. Sarah froze. Her hands stopped mid-motion, her eyes fixed on nothing. Her breathing quickened just once. Then she blinked, straightened the files, and went back to work. Perez caught the moment and said nothing. The calm returned, But he knew it wasn't just habit. It was armor, the kind of person built only after surviving something that never quite let go. It was nearly 9:30 p.m. when the command center fell quiet. The usual rhythm of chatter, radio calls, and footsteps had faded into the hum of distant generators. Only the soft glow of computer monitors lit the room, casting long reflections across the polished desks. Petty Officer Sarah Blake sat alone, her posture as straight as it had been that morning. Her eyes fixed on the screen, though her mind was elsewhere. The silence was deep enough to hear the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights above. After a moment, she unlocked the top drawer of her desk. Inside lay a small velvet box, edges worn, fabric frayed from years of being carried from one duty station to another. She opened it slowly, and the low light caught the gleam of an old Navy Challenge coin. Its surface had dulled with time, but the engraving was still visible. Valor at Sea. Operation Ghost Tide. Her thumb traced the words, her expression softening with a quiet ache that carried both pride and pain. She stared at it for a long time before closing the box and locking it away again. Through the glass wall, Chief Warrant Officer Miguel Perez paused on his way out. He saw the movement, recognized the small box, and caught a glimpse of the coin before the drawer closed. The phrase Ghost Tide stirred something faint in his memory. A classified mission whispered about, but never confirmed. He hesitated, then decided not to interrupt. The next morning came with the same noise and bustle. Lieutenant Connor Hale tossed a crumpled file onto her desk and laughed that she probably never stepped foot on a real ship. Sarah looked up briefly and replied that she had, on a few, even ones not listed on maps. The answer seemed harmless, almost dry humor. And Hale laughed again, as if she had proven his point. Perez didn't laugh. He turned toward her, studying her face for a second longer. The room kept moving, but the air between them felt heavier now. Charged with something, neither of them spoke aloud. It was 7:15 a.m., and the command center was already tense. The air was filled with the hum of servers, the sharp click of keyboards, and the shuffle of folders being passed too quickly between desks. Rear Admiral Jeffers was scheduled to arrive in less than an hour, and everyone was under pressure. The inspection file, a detailed report containing refueling schedules and Pacific Fleet supply chains, had gone missing. Without it, the day's inspection would collapse before it began. Lieutenant Connor Hale paced the center aisle, barking at junior officers to double-check the system archives. His frustration echoed off the walls, louder than the machinery. He accused the logistics staff of misfiling, the communications team of corruption errors, anyone within earshot of incompetence. Around him, people moved faster, clicking through directories, re-downloading reports. Anything to avoid his attention. Through it all, Sarah Blake sat at her workstation, focused and calm. Her hands moved steadily across the console as she searched through backup logs. Within minutes, she found what the others missed. The report had been auto-routed into a restricted backup folder labeled Archival Validation. She cross-verified the checksum against depot logs, ensuring its accuracy before printing. The rhythmic hum of the printer cut through the noise of chaos. She rose quietly, walked to Hale's desk, and placed the document in front of him. Original copy. Sire. Cross-verified. The words were soft, professional, and precise. Hale froze, staring at the report he had been shouting about for half an hour. Before he could speak, the doors opened, and the Admiral entered with his inspection team. Hale straightened instantly, putting on a confident smile. The Admiral praised his readiness and efficiency. Sarah stood behind them, expression composed, eyes lowered. Later, when the inspection ended, Perez found her refiling documents in the back corner. He told her she could have embarrassed Hale if she wanted to. She only smiled and said some people need the win more than others. Perez nodded slowly, realizing that her restraint was not submission, It was control, a quiet strength built from years of knowing when to speak and when silence said more. By 9:20 p.m., the tropical storm had swallowed Pearl Harbor. Rain hammered against the windows in relentless sheets, and wind screamed through the narrow spaces between hangars. The command center had gone to emergency power, bathing the corridors in red light. The air smelled of salt and wet metal. Every few seconds, thunder rolled across the harbor, deep and distant like cannon fire. Perez and Hale had been assigned to overnight duty, monitoring system integrity as the storm reached 40 knots and climbing. When they entered the logistics room, they found Sarah Blake still at her post. The light from her flashlight traced a narrow beam across stacks of sealed data containers. She was logging transfer codes by hand. The movement of her pen, steady despite the trembling floor. Hale stepped forward, frustration cutting through his voice as he told her to leave. The systems would hold until morning. She didn't even look up. If they fail, the exercise loses all personnel tracking. Her tone was calm, almost quiet, but it carried through the room with a kind of authority that didn't need volume. Another gust hit the building hard, rattling the vents and shaking a tall steel cabinet beside her. The sound of metal scraping filled the air before it toppled with a violent crash. Sarah moved before either man reacted. In one swift motion, she caught the edge, guiding it down to the floor instead of letting it fall. Papers and binders spilled out, scattering across the tile. Then came a smaller sound, sharp and distinct, a coin, spinning once before settling with a metallic click. Perez crouched to pick it up, brushing away the dust. The emergency light reflected across the engraving, and his breath caught Valor at Sea, Operation Ghost Tide. He looked up slowly, his eyes locking on her. Sarah stood still, flashlight steady in her hand. Face unreadable. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Perez whispered her name. She shook her head slightly, her voice barely above the storm's hum. Don't. Not here. Before Perez could reply, Hale let out a dry laugh. So that's what you keep in your pockets. Souvenirs? He stepped closer, his smirk loud in the silence. Perez turned sharply, anger cutting through his restraint. Watch your mouth. Lieutenant. Sarah didn't move. Her gaze lifted to meet Hale's. The air in the room seemed to still. Be careful. Sire, she said quietly. Some medals aren't earned. They're survived. Hale's expression faltered, the smirk fading. Even the storm outside seemed to hesitate, the thunder rolling off into silence. Perez felt a chill move through him. In that single moment, everything shifted. The jokes, the rank, the quiet. All of it collapsed under the weight of who she really was. The clerk was gone. What stood before them was something forged from storms far worse than this one. By 6:30 a.m., the storm had passed, leaving Pearl Harbor wrapped in gray mist and silence. The bay still smelled of salt and rain. Inside the command center, the air was tense. Communication with the USS Spokane, a fleet communications and systems vessel, had gone completely dark. No signal, no telemetry, no response to pings or remote access. The rear admiral stood behind the main console, voice clipped and cold, demanding a solution. Lieutenant Connor Hale was quick to speak, blaming the outage on power surges and seawater interference. He promised systems would self-correct. They didn't. The room buzzed with nervous motion. Officers typed commands, cycled servers, rechecked satellite links. But the monitors stayed blank. The Admiral ordered a manual override. Silence followed. No one volunteered. Sarah Blake finally spoke. If the ship's analog relays were intact, she said, she could restore communication manually. Hale smirked, asking if she was sure she wasn't better suited to fixing printers. The Admiral didn't hesitate. Permission granted. Petty officer. The The rain was still falling as the small transfer boat carried Sarah, Perez, and Hale to the Spokane. The ship loomed out of the fog, a dark mass against the silver water. Inside, everything was quiet. Emergency lights flickered. The air smelled of oil, burned circuits, and metal. They made their way to the engineering bay, flashlights cutting narrow beams through the darkness. Sarah stripped off her gloves, revealing steady, unshaken hands. She checked the power bus first, tracing cables and connectors until she found the main relay junction. Hale stood behind her, muttering about wasted time. Perez told him to shut it. Sarah found the backup board and connected 2 relay wires by hand. Sparks flashed, then faded. She keyed in a sequence on the offline terminal, her fingers moving quickly, as if they remembered the layout by muscle memory. She entered a bypass code, LV4 pack. The display came alive, flickering green across the dark console. Perez watched her type a second sequence. The screen responded. Authorization accepted. Manual control restored. Someone whispered, "Ghost protocol." Perez froze. He had only heard the phrase in passing years ago, tied to classified missions. Fail-safe systems meant to be buried. Within minutes, lights came back on throughout the Spokane. Screens glowed. Systems rebooted. Communication relays synced. The command center confirmed signal reestablishment. The Admiral's voice came through the speakers, steady and measured. "Excellent work." Who initiated the override? Perez looked at Sarah. She wiped her hands on a cloth and said simply, "Classified." "Sire?" Hala stood beside her, speechless for once. Perez smiled faintly, knowing the truth. Only someone who had been trusted with the Navy's deepest codes could have done what she just did. The clerk had disappeared. In her place stood an operator who never forgot what service meant. It was 800 a.m. when the sun rose clean and bright over Pearl Harbor. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and the sky clear. Flags snapped softly in the wind outside the headquarters building, their colors sharp against the blue. Inside the ceremonial hall, sailors and officers stood in formation, rows of pressed uniforms gleaming beneath the lights. The scent of polish and salt air filled the space, mingling with the quiet sound of boots shifting on the floor. The room carried the kind of silence that comes before something important. Rear Admiral Jeffers stood at the front, a folder of commendations in his hands. His voice echoed as he began reading the names of those recognized for their work during the storm. Lieutenant Connor Hale stood in the first row, his jaw tight but proud. When his name was called, the applause was polite, formal, the kind that began and ended quickly. He nodded, straightened his uniform, and returned to attention. The Admiral turned another page. His tone changed. Petty Officer First Class Sarah Blake. The name hung in the air, and the room went still. The Admiral frowned slightly, scanning the folder again. He looked up toward the back of the room, searching. Then his voice deepened as he read the next line. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake, recipient of the Navy Cross. The silence grew heavier. Every movement in the hall stopped. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Hale's head turned slowly, eyes wide with disbelief. Perez stood motionless beside him, already understanding. The Admiral spoke again, his voice softer now. He asked if she had led the rescue during Operation Ghost Tide, the mission where 57 sailors were saved under enemy fire. Sarah stood straight, eyes calm, and said she was part of a team. The Admiral closed the folder. "You led that team," he said, stepping down from the platform. Respect filled his tone. He saluted her. Perez raised his hand next, crisp and sure. Then, one by one, the entire hall followed. The sound of heels struck the floor in perfect rhythm, a wave of synchronized motion filling the room. Hale hesitated, then lifted his hand too. His eyes lowered. The tension that had filled the base for days melted into a single moment of unity. The Admiral reached into his pocket and opened a small black box. Inside was the Navy Cross, its ribbon folded neatly. He pinned it to her uniform, the metal gleaming beneath the bright light. His words were quiet but carried through the hall. "The nation owes you more than paperwork." She looked at him, her expression steady, and answered that she never stopped serving, just in Keter ways. The Admiral nodded once, slowly. For a long time, no one spoke. The flags shifted slightly in the faint breeze from the open doors. The only movement in the room, it was the sound of silence turned into respect. In that moment, every person there understood who she truly was. And for the first time, Sarah Blake stood not as a clerk, but as a soldier who had never stopped answering the call. It was 8:40 p.m., and the base had settled into quiet again. The storm was a memory now, replaced by the calm hum of the harbor. Outside, the water reflected the soft amber glow of floodlights, broken only by the distant movement of ships turning with the tide. Inside the operations office, the computers hummed steadily, casting pale light across the desks. The chaos of the past few days had faded into stillness. Sarah Blake sat at her usual desk, posture straight, uniform pressed. The Navy Cross on her chest caught the edge of the desk lamp, a dull glint rather than a shine. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, updating logs with her usual precision. The office smelled faintly of coffee and sea air. Chief Warrant Officer Miguel Perez entered quietly, carrying 2 steaming mugs. He set one beside her and took a seat across from her, leaning back slightly. For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them felt comfortable, filled with things both already understood and better left unsaid. Perez finally asked if she would ever tell the full story of Ghost Tide. Sarah looked up, her face calm, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she smiled faintly and said some stories belonged to the ones who did not come back. Perez nodded. He took a slow sip of coffee and said it was good to see her medal where it belonged. She replied softly that she never did it for medals. He looked at her for a long moment and answered that was exactly what made it matter. The office fell silent again. The sound of waves rolled faintly through the open window, followed by distant footsteps echoing down the hallway. Sarah glanced at the framed photo beside her monitor, a picture of the Spokane crew taken years earlier. She straightened it with one hand, then turned back to her work. Perez stood, finishing his coffee, his movements slow and deliberate. At the door, he paused and said the younger sailors would remember today for a long time. Sarah didn't look up as she typed her reply. If they remember the lesson, not the name, that will be enough. The sound of keys filled the room again, steady and sure, like the rhythm of the sea outside. It was 7:20 p.m. when the last light faded over Pearl Harbor. The water lay still, reflecting the orange and gold of the sky as ships drifted gently at anchor. The base lights flickered on one by one, stretching a soft glow across the piers. Inside the operations office, Sarah Blake sat alone at her desk. The steady hum of computers filled the quiet room. Her hands moved with practiced precision. The faint reflection of the Navy Cross, glinting under the desk lamp. Papers rustled softly. Outside, a breeze moved through the open window, carrying the scent of the sea. The narrator's voice came in low and measured, steady like the tide. Some heroes are never seen. It said, they don't fight for medals or applause. They serve because service is part of who they are. They keep the mission alive when no one is watching, carrying the weight of others quietly and without need for recognition. Sarah Blake was one of them. A reminder that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet resolve to keep going, long after the battle ends. The camera lingered on her for a moment longer, her silhouette framed by the light from the harbor. The keys on her keyboard clicked softly, rhythmic and calm. The narrator's final words faded into the stillness. True valor doesn't retire. It endures. In every quiet act of duty, In every life, made better because someone chose to keep serving. The screen dimmed to black as the sound of the ocean filled the silence once more.